You're not failing to lose belly fat because you're weak. It's because your body doesn't yet feel safe enough to let go. I want you to look at something very honestly. You cut calories. The scale drops. Your face looks leaner. Your arms get smaller, but your midsection barely moves. And you start thinking, maybe that's just my body type. No, this isn't body type. This is biology. Belly fat, especially around the navel and lower abdomen, isn't just excess fat. It's active endocrine tissue. It responds to insulin, cortisol, leptin. It communicates with the brain and nervous system. From an evolutionary perspective, central fat is an emergency reserve. It wraps around your internal organs. It exists to protect you when energy is scarce. Your body does not want to open that storage depot just because you decided to eat less for a few days. When you begin cutting calories, the first thing that happens is not fat burning. Your brain senses an energy shortage. The liver is instructed to release glycogen, stored glucose. You may see the scale drop quickly, but most of that is water-bound to glycogen. In the first week, your system doesn't trust you yet. It's just testing. Insulin begins to fall, but not consistently. Cortisol may rise if you're stressed, underslept, or training too hard. And cortisol is a hormone that tends to preserve abdominal fat, like a survival shield. So if you've ever felt, I'm doing everything right, but my stomach won't change, you're not imagining it. You're simply in the wrong biological phase. The body does not burn fat in aesthetic order. It burns in survival order. Visceral fat, the fat surrounding the liver and intestines, actually responds faster to energy deficits. But the subcutaneous fat in the lower abdomen, the kind you see in the mirror, has fewer beta-adrenergic receptors, the switches that help release fatty acids. Simply put, it is harder to mobilize. This is why I always say, fat loss is not a calorie battle. It is a hormone negotiation. Your body needs 3 things before it allows belly fat to be mobilized: insulin, low enough in a stable rhythm, cortisol controlled enough not to trigger defense mode, and an energy pattern repeated long enough for the system to believe this is not starvation. That is why people who quit in week 2 almost never reach the true fat-burning phase. Week 1 is glycogen depletion. Week 2 is metabolic adjustment. But only from week 3 onward, when insulin stays lower and the nervous system is less alarmed, does the body gradually shift toward using fat as its primary fuel. I'm not saying this to discourage you. I'm saying it so you stop blaming yourself. Belly fat isn't stubborn. It just needs reassurance. Part 1, the first 14 days you lose weight, but not yet fat. Now, let's speak precisely about what is happening in the first 2 weeks. When you begin reducing calories, the body does not immediately switch to burning fat. It shifts to using glycogen, the stored form of glucose in the liver and muscles. This is a fast, easily accessible fuel source, designed for periods when food intake is interrupted. Each gram of glycogen holds roughly 3 grams of water. So as glycogen becomes depleted, water leaves with it. Body weight can drop 2 to 4 kilograms in the first week. But that is not belly fat disappearing. That is water leaving the system. Many people look at the number on the scale and believe they are burning fat hard. But physiology has not reached that stage yet. In the first few days, the brain is still evaluating. Is this a temporary shortage or a long-term crisis? If your intake fluctuates, eating very little one day, more the next, the system does not stabilize long enough for insulin to fall sustainably. And high insulin is a signal to retain fat. Only when insulin remains lower consistently for several consecutive days does lipolysis, the release of fatty acids, begin to rise significantly. But alongside falling insulin, another mechanism appears: metabolic adaptation. The body begins conserving energy. Basal metabolic rate decreases slightly. Hunger hormones such as ghrelin increase. Leptin, the satiety hormone, decreases. This is not betrayal. This is survival. If you cut calories too aggressively, the body reacts more strongly. Cortisol rise. Thyroid activity may decrease. And in that hormonal environment, abdominal fat has even more reason to stay. This is where many people make a strategic mistake. They see the scale slow down in week 2. They assume the diet is not working. They cut more calories, add more cardio, sleep less because of stress, and unintentionally, they create the exact hormonal environment that makes central fat cling tighter. A plateau in week 2 is not a sign of failure. It is a phase of system recalibration. Glycogen has fallen. Insulin is beginning to stabilize at a lower level. The body is gradually learning to use fat more regularly as fuel instead of relying solely on glucose. But this transition does not happen in a single day. It requires repetition, stability, patience long enough for the brain to believe that energy is still coming, just at a lower level. Remember, this week 1 is the water release phase. Week 2 is the metabolic relearning phase. Only after these 2 stages stabilize does the body truly become ready to enter a deeper fat mobilization phase, including visceral fat and gradually the lower abdominal fat you see in the mirror. Part 2. The hormonal switch when the body truly allows belly fat to leave. If you've made it through the first 2 weeks without quitting, this is where things begin to change. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deep inside, your energy system is shifting phase. After roughly 3 to 6 weeks of maintaining a reasonable calorie deficit, insulin no longer fluctuates erratically. It stabilizes at a lower level, and consistently low insulin is the real condition required for lipolysis to occur continuously, not just in short bursts. At the same time, if you are sleeping enough and not pushing your body into chronic stress, cortisol becomes better regulated. When cortisol is no longer persistently elevated, the body no longer needs to retain central fat as a survival shield. This is when metabolic flexibility becomes clearly visible. Metabolic flexibility is the ability to smoothly switch between burning glucose and burning fat, depending on the situation. A metabolically inflexible person panics when glucose is low. They experience intense hunger, rapid fatigue, constant dependence on carbohydrates. A metabolically flexible person can go hours between meals with stable energy. When you enter this phase, the liver begins increasing ketone production from fatty acids, not because you are following an extreme keto diet, but because the body finally trusts fat as a reliable fuel source. And here is something many people do not realize. Visceral fat is often mobilized before lower abdominal subcutaneous fat. Visceral fat, the fat surrounding the liver and intestines, is more metabolically active. When you sustain an energy deficit long enough, the body prioritizes removing this more dangerous layer first. This explains why blood glucose, cholesterol, and blood pressure may improve before you visibly notice your stomach shrinking in the mirror. But the lower abdominal subcutaneous fat has fewer beta-adrenergic receptors, the receptors that stimulate fatty acid release. At the same time, it has a higher density of alpha-adrenergic receptors, which tend to inhibit lipolysis. Simply put, lower belly fat is biologically harder to access. So when you reach week 3 or 4 and still do not see dramatic changes in your stomach, it does not mean nothing is happening. Your body may be addressing the dangerous internal fat first. And only when the hormonal environment has stabilized long enough, when visceral fat has decreased, does the body begin turning to the visible layer, This is the moment many people miss. They stop at week 2 because they do not see their stomach change, when in reality, weeks 3 to 6 are the true permission phase. I want you to understand this clearly. Losing belly fat is not about activation. It is about maintaining the signal long enough. If you cut calories too aggressively, the body panics. If you fluctuate constantly, hormone never stabilize. If you sleep poorly and stay highly stressed, cortisol will continue pulling central fat to stay. But if you maintain a moderate deficit, around 15 to 20% below maintenance, combine it with high protein to protect muscle, resistance training to preserve lean mass, and sufficient sleep to regulate hunger hormones, you are sending a consistent message. We are not starving. We are restructuring. And when the body believes that, it begins to let go. Part 3. Losing belly fat is a biological ecosystem, not a campaign. At this point, we can say something plainly. Belly fat does not disappear because of determination. It disappears when the biological environment changes long enough. You can eat perfectly for a week. You can train hard for 10 days. But if the overall system is not stable, the body will not allow that central reserve to be released. Losing belly fat is the result of 4 pillars operating at the same time. First, a reasonable energy deficit. Around 15 to 20% below maintenance is enough to activate lipolysis without triggering survival panic. Cut too aggressively and thyroid activity drops. Leptin falls sharply. Cortisol rises, and you unintentionally lock central fat in place even more. Second, protecting muscle mass. Resistance training is not just to get bigger. Muscle is energy-consuming tissue, even at rest. Losing muscle means lowering basal metabolic rate. When muscle is preserved, the body is more willing to use fat as fuel rather than defend it. Third, stress regulation. Chronically high cortisol sends a danger signal to the system. Belly fat is treated as a protective cushion for internal organs when the body perceives threat. Sleeping 7 to 9 hours. Reducing excessive caffeine. Limiting overtraining. That is not weakness. It is hormonal strategy. Fourth, rhythm over extremism. A structured refeed, not uncontrolled binge eating, can help stabilize leptin and reassure the system. Maintaining 80% discipline over the long term is more effective than 100% for 3 weeks, followed by collapse. The most important point is this. Losing belly fat is a process of gaining permission, not imposing punishment. When insulin is consistently low, cortisol is controlled, muscle is protected, and the deficit is sustained long enough for the brain to trust that this is not starvation. The body begins to unlock the central store. At that point, change can accelerate unexpectedly. Waist circumference decreases, even if body weight does not drop dramatically. Energy stabilizes. Sugar cravings decline. The gap between meals lengthens without discomfort. These are signs you have entered true metabolic flexibility. If you leave too early, you will always think belly fat is stubborn. If you stay long enough, you will realize it simply follows survival logic. Your body is not fighting you. It just needs reassurance through consistent signals.